Hey everyone, Pugs here with two new reviews for y'all. Today I'm covering Squid's visit and To SquarePants or Not To SquarePants. This is a rather interesting pair of episodes. Both have a little bit of a reputation in their own ways, though I'm not sure if those reputations are really known outside of the SpongeBob SquarePants fandom space. If they aren't, then I'll just tell you now. Both of these episodes have a bit of a negative reputation, but for very different reasons. Well, as always, thank you all for watching the video today. I appreciate y'all's support so much, and as I write this script, I've just hit 1,000 subscribers, which is actually so amazing. Wow, who knew Arcane could get people interested in SpongeBob reviews? Alright, this intro is a little bit longer than usual, so why don't I just stop now and get right into it. Well now, this is exactly what I've been waiting for. Oh yes, I already know I'm about to get the pitchforks and torches on my ass for this, but I don't care. I really love Squid's visit. I consider myself the one-man PR team for this episode, which means that I am contractually obligated to argue for why this episode is actually really, really good, and argue that I shall. One of the reasons why people don't like this episode, its creepiness, is exactly one of the biggest reasons why I love it so much. Squid's visit is a masterclass in establishing an unsettling atmosphere, joining Spongehenge and Gone and even SB129 in receiving that compliment. This episode skillfully built up a suspenseful feeling of growing psychological horror that I think is really paid off as the episode goes on. And I think that this element of the episode is commonly overlooked by those who dislike it. Well, that's not quite the right wording. People who dislike this episode certainly recognize the creepiness factor, but they aren't fans of it. Whether that means they don't appreciate the purposeful creation of this creepy atmosphere, or they just aren't a fan of creepiness in SpongeBob, I'm not entirely sure. But I personally do appreciate this, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who has seen my reviews of any of the episodes that I just mentioned. But anyway, the creepy and unsettling nature of this episode is just so important to its foundation. Like, without this, the ending of the episode would make absolutely no sense at all. This is a small thing, but I love that the title card music of this episode is Wahini Wobble Faster, because just like with Gone and Spongehenge, this music does not even remotely indicate to the viewer the absolutely bizarre absurdity that's about to come their way. Like usual, I've linked that track in the description if you need a refresher on what it sounds like. Alright, let's get the chronological run-through on the road. As Squid's visit begins, I just love that SpongeBob's little eye is peeking out of the window, and actually, that reminds me of this game that I really love called Monument Valley. It's a gorgeous looking game, y'all should play it. Anyway, there's a character in that game called Totem, and first off, Totem is adorable, and secondly, I'm bringing this up because Totem looks exactly like SpongeBob here. Okay, tangent over. Back to the episode. What's interesting about the beginning of Squid's visit is that it actually uses awkward humor. The thing that I keep bringing up this season because it keeps not working and ending up making scenes drag and such. Well, what's interesting is that even though it still isn't funny here, it isn't grating and a chore to sit through like it can be at times. I also think that it's kind of funny that Mr. Krabs is just randomly asking Squidward about his after-work plans, and when he fails, he just kind of fucks off for the rest of the episode. And then SpongeBob comes in and does the exact same thing, except he doesn't leave Squidward alone. So soon after Cephalopod Lodge, I can't help but find some similarities between these opening scenes. Moving on, I like to see SpongeBob and Squidward walking to, or in this case from, work again, because it feels like it's been some time since we've seen that. SpongeBob is incredibly desperate for Squidward to come visit him, like desperate enough that I'm sure that this entire episode serves as SquidBob fuel. I don't ship SquidBob at all, so I wouldn't know, but I know how shippers move. Anyway, I think that SpongeBob's desperation to get Squidward to come over to his pineapple is a good driver for this episode, because it's simple, it makes sense, and it's pretty consistent with what we've seen in the show. Yeah, Squidward has been to SpongeBob's house before, but not for any willing visits. And most importantly, this premise leans into that creepy and weird SpongeBob angle that I find myself enjoying more often than not, and of course this episode will jump right into the deep end of that little pool later. This is kind of a side note, but I also think it's funny to imagine that the reason that SpongeBob is so desperate and insistent for Squidward to come over is something different than just desiring his company. Like, SpongeBob legitimately sounds like he wants Squidward to come over so that he can murder him in his sleep. And one last great thing about this beginning portion of the episode, I think it lays down some very tiny seeds of wrongness to help ease us into this episode very well. Are these seeds laid intentionally? Well, that's unclear, but I'm taking them to be seeds nonetheless. Squidward, to no one's surprise, refuses to come over to SpongeBob's house, but that doesn't stop SpongeBob from trying to make it happen. He gets ideas for getting Squidward to visit from both Squidward, as we'll see later, and Patrick, whose surprise appearance is not unwelcome, and which helps the episode to feel less isolated. This is all still just a part of the setup of the episode, as Squid's visit is one of those episodes that spends a lot of time setting things up so that we can sit back and enjoy the chaos later. This isn't a structure that always works, but I find myself entertained during the slower first half of this episode, so it works for me. We get little hints as to what's about to go down from the scene with Patrick, as well as from when Squidward spills some pepper on his rug because of SpongeBob's rebuilding. And when Squidward goes to get his vacuum, he finds that it's gone, and that SpongeBob took it, meaning that Squidward has to go over to SpongeBob's house. This very deliberate and already unhinged plot by SpongeBob just lets us know that some absurd shit is about to go down. And then the phone call between SpongeBob and Squidward is great, and I love the reveal at the end that they're actually just right across from each other. SpongeBob in this phone call is delightfully weird and a little bit creepy, which again just helps to build the anticipation of whatever it is we're about to witness. Once Squidward comes over for his vacuum cleaner, the fun begins, because it turns out that SpongeBob made the inside of his house look exactly like Squidward's, down to the smallest details like embroidery and medicine cabinet contents. Squidward here is just so funny. I love how so completely over SpongeBob's shit he is, smacking down all the refreshments that SpongeBob brings up, and then I love how the episode starts going down the road of unnerving as the exact details of SpongeBob's replica are revealed, because how did he know exactly how Squidward's coffee table was set up? How did he know the exact stitching of Squidward's pillow? How did he even get the vacuum in the first place? As Squidward explores SpongeBob's house, trying to find his vacuum, things get even weirder, more disturbing, and more unnerving, but all in the best ways, of course. Squidward's horror at each new detail he finds is excellent, and I love how it is played almost entirely seriously, like we are legitimately watching a horror episode right now. This pulls us, or at least me, in as an audience right away, and it makes me wonder just how far this horror will go. I find Squidward's reactions to be so funny, especially when he enters the bathroom and realizes that SpongeBob copied everything in there. And then we get some fun slapstick in this scene as well, which provides some humor along with all of the eeriness. This, of course, leans right back into the horror when Squidward thinks that he's only had a bad dream, only to realize that he's still in SpongeBob's house. At this point is when Squidward really starts to succumb to paranoia and get really creeped out, and I love it. I truly believe that this episode's choice to lean into SpongeBob's creepiness was an excellent one, because although he's not a villain or even an antagonist, he has those vibes, and I love it a lot because it's just so different than what we're used to. Reminds me of all those fan-made SpongeBob horror games that are out there. I think those are so fun. And then I love how Squidward's portrait room is used here. It's brilliant. Even though these self-portraits are normally used to show Squidward's self-absorption, here it low-key looks like SpongeBob made a Squidward shrine, even if it's just a replica of what Squidward has in his own house. Just another great example of how this episode turns established characterizations on their heads to make an excellent atmosphere of horror. Eventually, Squidward finds his vacuum, where it turns out to be in a closet full of SpongeBob's old interior decor. We also get some fun slapstick yet again, with the vacuum getting stuck in Squidward's head, and I love how the episode kind of subverts expectations with Squidward easily leaving SpongeBob's house without anything happening. However, that's a false security that we get, a purposeful sense of ease made because it leads right into the fantastic reveal that Squidward's house actually burnt down during all of this madness because he left the casserole in the oven. I love tight writing. We then get the absolutely amazing last minute of the episode where Squidward just has a complete mental breakdown. His face when SpongeBob offers for Squidward to sleep over is amazing, and then I love his bizarre little tea party with the vacuum cleaner. Shows that everything he went through in this episode just broke him mentally, and it's easy to see why. And then it's nice to see him sleeping peacefully in SpongeBob's replica, while SpongeBob and Gary, who does not deserve this, sleep outside. So in a way, Squidward got a win at the end of the episode, but he still loses. God, there's so many things that I can say about this episode, but I've already hit on most of them. One thing that I haven't mentioned yet that I also find pretty great is how little SpongeBob appears in the second half, or perhaps last third of the episode. All of the horror here is carried by Squidward's exploration and his reactions, as well as his and our questioning of how SpongeBob did all of this in the first place, and perhaps the vague specter of SpongeBob being somewhere in this house. SpongeBob doesn't even have to be present to give this episode some horror qualities, though of course it was necessary for him to be in the episode's setup. What I really love about Squid's visit is how it balances the horror and the humor so well as how it manages to be really entertaining throughout. Spongehenge forgot the humor, and Gone was excellent until the ending, but Squid's visit is good all the way through. If anything, I would have actually wanted it to lean into the horror more, but that's not even remotely a complaint. This episode is great the way it is. It's a perfect episode for someone like me who loves seeing SpongeBob, both the show and the character, be a bit unsettling. All of this is why I'm putting this episode in my amazing tier, where it comes in with a score of 9.4 out of 10. Okay, I gotta ask. I'm not the only person who thought that To SquarePants or Not To SquarePants was a special episode, right? Like, I feel like it was for sure promoted as one, just like Best Day Ever was. In my opinion, this is the kind of episode that could have only been made at this point in the show's run, like after it had become a super mega hit, because this episode is very meta. I mean, not exactly, but like, the idea of making an entire episode about SpongeBob changing his pants only really works when his character design has become iconic, you know? Yeah, you can make an episode like this at any time, but it makes more sense for it to happen when your main character has an iconic character design, and name for that matter. And while I'm discussing the premise of this episode, I'll say that from the outset I'm rather neutral on it. It's not the best idea in the world, but it all depends on the execution. Let's see how that went. One thing I really enjoy about To SquarePants or Not To SquarePants is that it doesn't take itself too seriously. I like when episodes do that because it usually ends up being funnier. Like, I really like how overly dramatic this opening scene is, calling what's happened a tragedy and everything. I just think being purposefully unserious while evoking gravity can be peak comedy. Unfortunately, the strong start for this episode is weakened when we're forced to listen to Patrick make this victory screech like noise for like an entire minute, maybe longer. I don't have the timetables in front of me at the moment, but I assure you that it was for way too long. And this screeching being the reason why SpongeBob's pants end up shrunk, since Patrick kept him on the phone listening to this nonsense, feels pretty weak. Anticlimactic too, but I think that was the point, and theoretically I would have been fine with that, having all of this melodrama be caused by such a banal reason, but I think it could have played out differently. Things improve when SpongeBob goes to buy himself some new pants. I always love a good trying on clothes montage. For some reason, the first example I'm thinking of is the 13th Doctor's first episode in Doctor Who. That one wasn't even a montage. Not sure why that was my first thought. I love 13 in her era, by the way. Let me just make that clear for those of y'all familiar with Doctor Who. Anyway, SpongeBob puts on the round pants, and I think he looks absolutely ridiculous with them. It's kind of funny. We're then presented with what's clearly going to be the main conflict of the episode, with SpongeBob's whole identity being forcibly changed because of these new pants. And I feel very conflicted about this, though I think one thought and feeling is winning out over the other right now. So, on one hand, it's irritating that nobody can recognize SpongeBob because of his new pants, especially Sandy, because she is literally more observant than that. Of course, as Squid was just trying to get SpongeBob to go away, perhaps this could mean that Sandy was joking too? And Mr. Krabs later recognizes SpongeBob, so maybe the only person legitimately confused was Patrick? Well, the episode should have been more clear about this. Anyway, on the other hand, it's pretty funny that because SpongeBob's whole image is tied to his name, which is itself tied to his clothes, the point that changing his clothes changes his identity is pretty smart, I can't lie. So this episode is very meta in that way. Or, not exactly meta, more self-referential? Not sure what the exact term I'm looking for is, but I think there's some sort of commentary to be had here, and so I lean more to the this conflict is funny side of things. Or I do until it starts going a little too far. Patrick's inability to recognize SpongeBob really just isn't funny, so the focus being on him here is not helping things, and I don't like how Patrick doesn't let SpongeBob into his own house because he can't recognize him. It's just frustrating, immensely so. And then SpongeBob decides to lean into having a new identity, which is definitely better than everyone thinking that he's someone else when he's not trying to be, I suppose. And then, for some reason, the episode decides to take a page from the accursed book of Choir Boys by having SpongeBob clear his throat annoyingly for like 20 seconds straight, so that was an assault to my ears that I did not find myself appreciating. At least Squid knocking himself out was funny. And then once Mr. Krabs comes out, I'm reminded of As Seen on TV, with SpongeBob working at the Krusty Krab under false pretenses. I love how Mr. Krabs doesn't even ask what's going on, just sighs and walks away. SpongeBob then acts like a new employee at the Krusty Krab, and this is okay. It both does and doesn't make sense for him to do that, and I suppose that it is in character for him to completely follow his made-up rules for how to have a fresh start, but also, he knows how to do everything that he's asking about, so why doesn't he just do that? So, although this part does feel in character, it also feels rather pointless, like I think the episode could have done something else for this remaining time. SpongeBob learning from Squidward is alright. At first it's kinda meh, but once SpongeBob starts really picking up on Squidward's attitude, it gets funny, like when they're both saying no to the customer. This section of the episode kind of feels like Krusty Krab training video a little bit too. And then we get to the end of the episode where I get what I want, with Patrick's foolishness being pointed out in the episode, and Mr. Krabs coming up with the obvious solution of taking off the round pants. Now, I don't really like that SpongeBob proceeds to walk around in his underwear for the rest of the episode, but hey, at least it's better than him being completely naked, like in All That Glitters, I guess. Just, God, I'd never eat at the Krusty Krab unless it was an episode like Krusty Krab training video. Too unsanitary. And then Sandy's joke ending the episode was good too, because it helps to round out the whole episode. It also tells me that Sandy was probably then joking earlier in the episode, which makes that segment much more appealing to me. To SquarePants or Not To SquarePants is a good episode, I think. Patrick's foolishness is irritating, especially in the first half of the episode, but other than that, the episode is pretty enjoyable and gets funny when Squidward takes SpongeBob under his wing. I wouldn't say that this is a generally funny episode though, but it's at least not boring and is overall very entertaining. And like I said, I do like the self-referential, kinda tongue-in-cheek quality of this episode. So I've decided I'm placing this episode in my good tier, where it comes in with a score of 7.4 out of 10. As always, I'll be ending this video with some closing thoughts of mine. So I didn't really talk about the reputation of To SquarePants or Not To SquarePants at all. That's my bad. Generally, I think people think that this episode is a boring one. What's funny is that I checked out the forum to see what others thought about this episode, and when this episode premiered, the opinions were rather positive. Like, very, very positive. But then they started getting negative. I wonder why. The answer is most likely the wave of negativity hitting this show in the mid-2010s. Like, yes, opinions somewhat mellow over time, but I think that is the big reason why. With Squid's visit, I think it's rather obvious what the reputation of this episode is, if you're at all familiar with fandom trends. I swear to God, I've been using this term every fucking review now, but 3 words, Squidward torture porn, and in response, I only have one word. No. Just no. Especially no for this episode, because the entire point is that this is terrifying and creepy. Like, that is literally the point of the episode. And I'm tired. I'm not about to argue about it. And I think that's all the closing thoughts I've got for y'all today. So with that, I'll end things here, and I'll see y'all in the next review.